Hi there. Welcome back to Kari's Confessions, a nonprofit exec tells all. I'm Kari Anderson, principal with Insight Consulting, a recovering nonprofit executive director and current consultant to nonprofits nationwide. My work now is to ensure that you've got the support and systems on the back end of your business to do your best work. And my podcast specifically gets into pieces and parts that you might need to continue that work in your office on a weekly basis. Today's topic is fund development planning, and it's timely because we're in the fall. Many of us are working through budget cycles right now, and there certainly is a synergy and an alignment for making sure that as you're thinking about the revenues that you need to fulfill mission, we're also talking about how we are going to raise those revenues that support the work that you're doing, right? Whether that is staffing investments, capital investments, or investment in programs. Got three big takeaways, I think, for you today. First of all, actually talking through what exactly is fund development planning. The second is really talking through, in case you need additional support for this, why is the actual planning of how we raise money important? And the third piece is why it's so important to involve board members and specifically a certain board committee in the planning of this work to ensure that there's board buy-in and engagement and support for you in this process. So first and foremost, what the heck is fund development, right? Sometimes we hear fundraising, we hear revenue generation. What exactly is fund development? Well, it's more than raising money. Specifically, it's the strategy, right? It's the strategy behind why we've chosen to focus on specific revenue streams. It's how you're going to connect and engage with donors and funders. This is the work that builds your organizational culture and establishes that philanthropy and gratitude are a part of how you roll, right, at your business. So actually creating a plan, right, a strategic fund development plan provides you a roadmap as to how you're going to achieve your fundraising goals, how you may generate new revenue streams, really important for your organization, and how you're going to sustain your operations. So why do you need a plan, right? I think back to an unnamed organization that I worked for a long time ago. We were a special event churning, burning machine. We certainly did not have a fund development plan. We just did the same things that we had always done year after year. I think one year I did 137 events, and I hesitate to call them events because they really weren't raising a lot of money. It just felt like I was playing whack-a-mole all the time, right? I barely made my budget every year. I made it, right? I barely made my budget. But when I had left that organization and started working for another, this was the first time I actually had a fund development planning process. And it was like speaking Greek. I had no idea what we were talking about. So thankfully, right, some good bosses, a couple great volunteers that had done this well before, and they were able to explain the why, right? Well, one why, it helps ensure that you've got diversity in terms of how you raise money, right? Not healthy, wonderful, but not healthy to just be funded by one grant or one very large donor or one very special event, right? It's wonderful that those things are a part of how you're rolling, right? But what happens if that event doesn't go well? I think back to when I worked for the American Heart Association, and our heart balls are always in February during American Heart Month, and the Billings Gala was blizzarded out. Not helpful, right? When you're depending on a significant amount of money from one particular event. What happens if the grant funding stops? That's actually a normal thing, right? We get too beholden to a particular piece, and then the grant doesn't fund anymore. Or what happens if you and the donor aren't getting along? And what happens if they choose to move their money elsewhere, right? So a plan ensures that you are diversifying or focusing on the eventual diversification of revenues for your organization. A fund development plan ensures that you make informed decisions about how you're raising money. And I like to call this the no document. And what do I mean by that? Well, if we've got a plan and we're staff and we have decided and the board has approved the plan, like this is how we're going to raise money, you're going to eventually have a well-meaning and totally uninformed volunteer, could be a donor, might be a board member who wasn't paying much attention, and said, hey, I think you need to go focus on this car wash or this bake sale or this particular third-party event that's not going to raise you very much money, but it's certainly going to eat up a lot of your time. And this wonderful fund development plan allows you to say, thank you so much for thinking of us. It's wonderful that you're interested in helping us raise resources for the organization. I'm focusing my time and my team's time on this plan this year because we've mapped out that if we focus here, we can hit and exceed our revenue goals. I'd love to share more of it with you if you're interested in learning about it, right? So it allows you to say no very, very gracefully without ever saying no, right? It's informed decisions. Good fund development plans, again, it doesn't matter how long or how short, outline action steps and assign responsibilities to particular team members, whether that is a board member, whether that's a volunteer, whether that's a staff person. Great fund development plans encourage you to set goals and measure results, right? So a plan isn't just going to be the action steps. It's what's the end game here? And the end game better be money. And ideally, it's more money than you raised last year. So you're setting monetary goals, and it also allows you to measure how did you do against that this year? And that could be with increased sponsorship. That could be with retention of donors. It could be signing on new monthly donors. So it encourages you, right, to both goal set and measure results. When I've seen great fund development plans executed, they allow opportunities to engage your board with philanthropy. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit. And I would say last, one of the big pieces with the why, right, for a fund development plan is that it allows you to establish clear and concise messaging around your cause and the impact that your organization is making in your community. So, when do we do this, right? Like, there's not a bad time to create a fund development plan, but I will tell you there are certainly times that it makes a lot more sense. So first, if you don't have one, just starting now, right, would be fabulous. But typically where I see nonprofits having the most synergies and successes doing this type of work is they're creating the fund development plan for the next year at the same point in time that your finance committee is working on your particular budget, right? So the idea is finance and fundraising are aligned. If the finance committee is working on how much money you need to deliver on mission, program, right, salaries for the following year, well, then the fund development committee should be working on, well, how are we going to raise the money that we need? And it might just be gap monies because you're heavy program funded, or it might be your entire budget. So I always start, right, with conducting an assessment of how we're currently raising money, gathering data ideally from your CRM or your donor database, right, because that's where you've been tracking by different campaigns and by different appeals, how many donors you have, what the ROI has been on that campaign, what the average size gift is, right, what your sponsorships have been. So you're bringing data in to be able to start planning for this next year. So we always start with the data, and then you bring the team together, right? So who should be on the team? Well, you as the executive director, right, you might be the party of one for this particular piece in terms of staff. If you've got a development team, right, development staff member, they really should be the individual who starts this process. You, of course, are intimately involved in it, but this is really their body of work for you to be able to add value to. And we want the board fund development committee involved with us. Why? A couple reasons. Again, this is a strategic document, right? So we're allowed to think higher in terms of where could we go? What could we do with fundraising? And we want the fund development committee involved because fund development committees are supposed to be involved in creating cultures of philanthropy on the board. They're supposed to be involved in making sure that board members are plugged into fundraising. And so if they are a part of how we're planning to raise money, it makes the sale, if you will, to the board about why we're focusing our energies here a lot more, valuable for sure, right? So I would absolutely involve your fund development committee. So what's the recipe, right? What does this need to be made of? Well, mission, vision, always, right? We always start with, why are we doing this work? There should be a case statement, right? It does not need to be a novel. So it doesn't even need to be a 5-paragraph essay. It's, why are we here, right? Like, what is the case for support? Why would donors want to invest in your business? And I'm using those words specifically. We run a business, right? We just happen to be a not-for-profit instead of a for-profit organization. And not for profit, right? That's a tax status, not a business model. Donors are our investors. They are giving us money, and they, instead of getting a dividend, right, or a perk at the end, they are expecting us to deliver on mission. So the case statement or the case for support has to be able to articulate why us, right? Why is our work so important? Certainly, a great fund development plan is a current snapshot of your funding situation. So that means, where are you getting your money right now, right? Is it from grants? Is it from annual campaign? Is it from special events? Is it from third-party revenue streams or earned income? Is it from, do you have an endowment, right? Or do you have some other income sources? But being able to lay out the current state of affairs, also identify goals and strategic priorities for each of those revenue streams, that if there's opportunities for growth. For example, maybe your organization doesn't have a planned giving program yet. Well, we certainly should, right? There's going to be $68 trillion that transfer over the next 25 years. We should be prepared to be a beneficiary of some of those funds. So you're going to be able to look at how you currently bring in money and see if there's gaps or opportunities for you to be able to spend some time and efforts on in terms of strategy for this coming year. So as you're putting this plan together, and there may be a draft, right, and a couple of revisions, certainly there needs to be buy-in, right? I know for some organizations, fundraising is still, people just don't like it. And it's probably because we're going about it maybe incorrectly, for sure, right? Because this is about organizational storytelling. But there needs to be buy-in from your team, right? Whether your team is volunteers, team is staff, and the board as to how you're going to raise the money, because the plan is more than a plan. When there's buy-in, it signals that your organization is committed to creating that culture of philanthropy, right? So when I'm talking about a culture of philanthropy, it's making sure that from the top down at your organization, and it doesn't matter whether you've got a traditional hierarchy, or a flat hierarchy, that everyone understands that fundraising is a crucial component of organizational success, and we have planned the best strategies possible that support our culture. So that's why, right, the buy-in is so important. So where would we use our plan, right? Why is this document important for you to continue to activate after it's approved by the board? Well, it certainly should inform the agendas at your fund development committee meetings, right, which are the board level committee meetings. Certainly should be talked about and discussed at board meetings. I'm not going to say every board meeting, but there's certain benchmarks during the year where the fund development plan could and should be addressed, and that conversation should be led by your fund development committee chair, certainly supported by you as the executive director and or development staff. The plan is used to measure results and to evaluate progress multiple times throughout the year. So if I were in your shoes, right, and I had staff, that fund development committee or that fund development plan, especially if this is development staff, would be part and parcel for my one-on-ones with them on a weekly basis, right? We want to be able to make sure that we're tracking, and that if we're ahead of schedule, great. If we're on schedule, wonderful. If we're not, let's address that early, right, and often, so that we can support the team members in getting back to where we need to be. Or if there's a course correction that needs to happen, that we're informed well in advance of all of a sudden being halfway through the year or midway through the year, and we're having a huge monetary gap that we're having to make up. And it's a working document, right? So you created it maybe in October of one year, and you might need to update it or refresh it as you move on, because funders have changed, right? Maybe you got a windfall gift, maybe you didn't get a grant. And so the idea is, like a budget, it is not a static document. It is a living document that helps informs decisions you make about whom you're asking to engage in an investment with your organization at what time. So if you'd like to continue this conversation, I'd welcome you to visit my website. That's insightconsultinggroup.com. I've got an email address there ready for you. And if you ping me, I am happy to send you a sample fund development plan and a couple of other resources that may help you in mapping out what are the best ways for me to raise money this coming year. Again, I'm so happy that you joined me today. Please make sure you follow me on your favorite podcast channels, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.